This week, we're going to finish our series on revelation and response. So remember, that is both us hearing from God and then responding to God. So hearing and doing is the way to think about that. So we're going to be looking at a passage from 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 1 through 19. So as we read through this, think about how each character is responding to the things they hear from God. So they'll get a revelation from God, and then they will respond. Now Naaman was commander of the army of the king of Aram. He was a great man in the sight of his master, and highly regarded, because through him the Lord had given victory to Aram. He was a valiant soldier, but he had leprosy. Now bands of raiders from Aram had gone out and had taken captive a young girl from Israel, and she served Naaman's wife. She said to her mistress, "If only my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria, he could cure him of his leprosy." Naaman went to his master and told him what the girl from Israel had said. "By all means, go," the king of Aram replied. "I will send a letter to the king of Israel." So Naaman left, taking with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of clothing. The letter that he took to the king of Israel read, "With this letter I am sending my servant Naaman to you so that you may cure him of his leprosy." As soon as the king of Israel read the letter, he tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Can I kill and bring back to life? Why does this fellow send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? See how he is trying to pick a quarrel with me." When Elisha, the man of God, heard that the king of Israel had torn his robes, he sent him this message: "Why have you torn your robes? Have the man come to me, and he will know that there is a prophet in Israel." So Naaman went with his horses and chariots and stopped at the door of Elisha's house. Elisha sent a messenger to say to him, "Go, wash yourself 7 times in the Jordan, and your flesh will be restored, and you will be cleansed." But Naaman went away angry and said, "I thought that he would surely come out to me and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, wave his hand over the spot, and cure me of my leprosy. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" So he turned and went off in a rage. Naaman's servants went to him and said, "My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much more then when he tells you, 'Wash and be cleansed'?" So he went down and dipped himself in the Jordan 7 times, as the man of God had told him, and his flesh was restored and became clean like that of a young boy. Then Naaman and all his attendants went back to the man of God. He stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel. So please accept a gift from your servant." The prophet answered, "As surely as the Lord lives, whom I serve, I will not accept a thing." And even though Naaman urged him, he refused. "If you will not," said Naaman, "please let me, your servant, be given as much earth as a pair of mules can carry, for your servant will never again make burnt offerings and sacrifices to any other god but the Lord. But may the Lord forgive your servant for this one thing. When my master enters the temple of Rimmon to bow down, and he is leaning on my arm, and I have to bow there also, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord forgive your servant for this." "Go in peace," Elisha said. Let's look at this passage by looking through each of the characters that we see. So first we see the servant girl. She was taken against her will, but even as she's serving in Naaman's household, she still wants what is best for the master. And she knows of Elisha. She doesn't know him by name, and she knows that he has the power to cure leprosy, and that if Naaman goes there, that he will. She has this deep down belief that it will happen. She doesn't say he could, he says he will. How did she know this? Well, she was clearly taken away from Israel at a young age, uh, but she must have learned a lot about God and that Elisha existed before she was taken into captivity. And so her solid foundation, being raised in a family that worshiped and honored God, was able to sustain her even when she was far away from the ability to worship or learn more about God in the context of her community. Next character we see is Naaman's wife. So it doesn't say that she said anything, but it goes from the servant girl telling telling Naaman's wife to all of a sudden Naaman taking action. So she clearly heard from the servant girl, and then as she heard that message, she told Naaman. She believed that there would be action that would be taken from it, that it was worth her time and worth her husband's time to hear from it. So she listened and responded by passing the message on. The next character that we see is the king of Aram. So he sends Naaman off gladly, and he has a recommendation to the king of Israel to receive him. So the king of Aram is Naaman's boss, who's also a king. So he's letting one of his main advisors and one of his main servants leave on this personal mission. The king clearly cares about Naaman enough to allow him to take at least a couple of weeks off. This is going to be a long trip for him. So he is responding faithfully and in love once he hears a request from Naaman. The next character we see is the king of Israel. So I think the most interesting thing we see about the king of Israel is that he shows some acute theological insight, but he doesn't really do anything with it. So he knows that only God has the power to kill and the power to raise the dead. He has the power to heal. But uh, knowing that, that doesn't change the way the king of Israel acts. So the king is scared because of the position he's in. A general from a bordering nation is coming, and he sees that if he can't heal this guy, or this guy doesn't leave healed, it's going to be something that probably leads to war. And he knows he doesn't have the power to heal Naaman, uh, but he knows that God can. But with his previous knowledge and in this current situation he finds himself in, he doesn't put the pieces together. He doesn't say, okay, well, I can't do this, but I know God can, so my response will be, I'll ask God to heal him. We know that kings of Israel do pray. We know that they pray for the sick. When King David's newborn son was sick, he prayed for 7 days and 7 nights. Uh, Ultimately, God did not answer his prayer in the way that he wanted, but David was personally intervening. At the same time, as this king of Israel is not praying, he is not referring him to somebody else who can pray for him. In this case, that would be the prophet Elisha. So the next characters, we're saving Naaman for last of the main characters. We see Naaman's servants. So when Naaman hears Elisha's advice and doesn't listen to it, they're there and they encourage him to actually listen. They present him with, they try to convince him to go forward with doing what Elisha says, that he should be obedient. And these guys are some really good advisors, really good friends to Naaman, because they tell him, hey, you were willing to do something that was expensive, that was going to cost you a lot. But now you're in a situation where it's not going to cost you pretty much anything. Just go down to the river, man. And so with that, because they're persistent, Naaman actually follows through and does something. So these servants have heard what the message from the prophet of God said, and they do whatever they can to help Naaman be obedient to it. And so let's look at Elisha before going to Naaman. So Elisha is the solid foundation of this story. He hears from God and responds. When he hears that Naaman has arrived, he sends messengers to the king of Israel, and he sends a message to Naaman. He already heard from God how Naaman would be healed if he dips himself in the Jordan 7 times. He simply sends that message, and then uh, passes it on. Passes on the message from God. So he's very um, solid in making that happen. So finally, let's look at Naaman. So this passage is a lot about Naaman. We see his struggles with belief and his struggles with obedience during this passage. He's quick to believe a cure might exist. So Naaman was a mega rich dude, the general of an army, right hand of a king. I've seen estimates that based on all that he's bringing like the equivalent of like 1.2 million dollars worth of stuff as gifts to make his healing possible. So as a rich guy, he would have tried everything to be healed of his leprosy. It was not something he wanted. So he's already tried everything that was possible to be tried. So when he hears that there's a supernatural uh, healing existing through his wife, he hears from the servant girl, he goes forward and tries to have this healing happen. It's worth a shot for him. So he does what he has to do. He talks to the king. He gets the leave. He's willing to spend much of his vast fortune to see this occur. And so then, when he arrives in Israel, he finds out there's nothing there for him in the kingly court, but he gets the message from the prophet and immediately responds, starts heading over to Elisha's house. But on his way there, he's greeted by a messenger and he's told, hey, go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. He has a strong reaction to this. Uh, he is a high class guy. What he would have expected would have been for Elisha to meet him on the road and walk him back to his property. That's how hospitality worked for somebody of honor in those days. And so the fact that Elisha doesn't even show up himself, he just sends a messenger and says, "Hey, you don't even need to come to my house. Just go and do the thing," is really offensive to him. It makes him angry. And I just imagine this scene of he's there, Naaman's there with his crew. They're walking with their animals, their caravan over to Elisha's house. He gets this message and he storms off. It says that he goes away. So, where's he going? He's just like walking out into the wilderness, sort of stewing. I can imagine him just mumbling under his breath. And eventually, right, his servants catch up to him. We already talked about them. But the servants speak with Naaman, and Naaman is receptive. He has a relationship with these guys. He's already put in a bunch of effort. They say, you don't have anything to lose. Give it a shot. And so Naaman does. Naaman is encouraged and able to follow through with what he originally wanted to, thanks to the help from his servants, and I would call them friends. So following that wise counsel, he takes a small step of obedience. He goes down to the river and plunges himself in 7 times. And when he comes out, all of the sores on his skin are gone. He has the skin of a young boy, it says. Given my current life circumstance, I'm thinking about, the smooth as a baby's bottom is what all of Naaman's skin is looking like. So in the end, it didn't cost him very much, but that little obedience that he showed was life-changing for him. His whole worldview changed just because he was able to do this small thing. So he comes out of the water. He walks all the way to Elisha's house himself. He doesn't expect an audience anymore. He is humbled. He's still willing to part with his money. Elisha says, "Don't give me your money." But then, in contrast to what he had been doing before, worshiping the gods of Aram, he says, "I will only worship the one true God now." So he goes from being an idolater, somebody who worshiped multiple gods, to worshiping the one God of the universe. And Elisha gives him special dispensation to do what he needs to do moving forward because he is serving a king who worships another God. But if he's coming back, it would be clear to the king that he was not worshiping the way that he used to. So I think this passage shows that small obedience can go a very long way. So as per usual, let's go into our questions. So we'll spend a few minutes reflecting. So where in this passage is there conflict for you, and where in this passage is there clarity?